Thank you, Zimbabwe, for tuning into yet another informative edition of your program. This is Agricultural New Directions, Agribusiness, and my name is Wadzanai Manyore. So this is a platform which is specifically created for our farming community here in Zimbabwe. This is also where the various stakeholders in the agricultural industry, including the private sector, converge and share ideas on how to make agriculture sustainable in Zimbabwe. Now, if you look at Sustainable Development Goal number 1 and 2 respectively, they talk of hunger eradication and poverty alleviation. Now, if you look at it, Zimbabwe is an agro-based economy with well over 70% of the population making their living out of agricultural ventures. To discuss this and more today, I am joined by Graham Maddock. He is with Food Crop Contractors Association and he is the chairman right here in Zimbabwe. We are generally going to be talking of promoting sustainable development in agricultural ventures. Mr. Maddock, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Watson. Thank you.
Yes, like I've alluded to earlier, the sole purpose of the program is to ensure that our farming community is included in sustainable methods of farming, which includes contract farming, which has proven now and again to be the most sustainable way of financing agriculture, looking at our smallholder farmers and even the large-scale farmers. As our first question, I would like you to answer to our audience there at home when this organization was formed, that is Food Crop Contractors Association, in relation to our agricultural sector here in Zimbabwe.
Okay, Watson, the Food Crop Contractors Association, or FCCA,
yes,
came together as a fairly loose grouping of private sector contractors who were primarily financing the growing of row crops, maize, wheat, soya, primarily. Yes. And we came together and we basically formed a loose organization at the beginning of 2020 as a build-up to the 2020 wheat crop.
Okay.
And we were formed primarily because we were struggling to get an understanding primarily from government, our line ministry being the Ministry of Agriculture, and also through the Ministry of Agriculture from the commercial banks to understand the importance of private sector funding for row crop farming.
Okay.
You mentioned in our previous discussions where you've been looking at the likes of tobacco.
Yes.
And no doubt you've also been looking at cotton.
Yes.
Now those are high profile contracted crops, whereas your maize, your soyas, your wheat tend to be a lower profile and they tend to take second place.
Yes.
And we felt as an organization whose members are primarily involved in the funding of those crops that we needed to improve our profile, we needed to improve our lobbying ability, and we needed to essentially create some critical mass that got us a seat at the table.
Okay.
And that was basically what it was all about.
Okay, that was very detailed and very precise. And I like that you alluded to the fact that we would look at cotton and tobacco and they are given generally a first preference when it comes to contracting. And in a way, people were sort of like shying away from maize and our wheat. And yet we want to talk of issues addressing food security. Moving right along, since you have formed your association, what are some of the achievements that you can cite and you can tell our viewers there at home?
I would say the most important thing has come about as a result of the new or newish arrival of Minister Masuka in the Ministry of Agriculture.
Yes.
In that he has, from the outset, been looking to engage the full range of players in agriculture. And obviously, he's also very keen on interacting with organizations rather than individual companies or entities or farmers.
Okay.
So as the Food Crop Contractors Association, we were an ideal body for him to engage in terms of understanding the problems and the successes and otherwise of the private sector contractors.
Okay.
And as Food Crop Contractors Association, both as an organization and in some instances as individuals, we are very fortunate in that we sit on a working group that is chaired by the minister, and we sit and meet with him every Thursday morning. At the moment it's virtual because of COVID restrictions.
Very true.
But it does at least give us an opportunity to interact one-on-one, not just with the minister, but with all of the other entities that he's called into that working group, which includes Bankers Association, it includes the RBZ, it includes the Ministry of Finance, it includes seed houses, Fertilizer Manufacturers Association, and it's a platform where we can deal on a weekly basis with the immediate issues affecting agriculture, and specifically food crop agriculture.
Okay, thank you so much, Sam. I would also want to talk about private sector's involvement and its importance and issues it might seem to address since you're getting into the playing field. You would look at it and see that our government is responsible for the legal framework guiding how things are going to be done in the industry. So ever since your entrance into the playing ground, what are some of the issues that you might feel that you have addressed, and the importance of private sector's involvement in this kind of crops?
What I'd like to do, Wadzana, if you mind, is actually start at the tail end of that question and talk about our impact. And the best way to do it is to talk about the recently harvested wheat crop,
yes,
which was probably one of the bigger wheat crops in some years. Now, the current sort of total of wheat delivered both to the Grain Marketing Board and to private millers is somewhere in the order of 250,000 metric tons.
Okay.
And of that 250,000 metric tons, the private sector delivered 158,000 tons of that.
Okay.
76.2% of that wheat was delivered by private sector. That is farmers who were funded either by organizations within the FCCA, or farmers who are funded directly from banks, or farmers who self-funded. The balance of 24% is what was funded through government channels, being the Presidential Input Scheme and CBZ Agro Yield.
Okay.
Now, if we look at the summer of 21-22, of the hectarage that has actually been planted, the private sector dominates the physical plantings in terms of maize and soyas and row crop related crops.
Okay.
Yes, I think if we look at on a national scale, you're going to see a big contribution being made by the Presidential Input Scheme through from VUDZA. You're going to see an equally large contribution being made by smallholder farmers using their own resources. You are going to see a contribution being made by CBZ Agro Yield using government guarantees and the likes. But the reality is that outside from VUDZA, presidential inputs, the private sector is currently the next largest contributor in terms of hectares planted.
Yes.
Coming back to the wheat crop, the other thing that needs to be stressed is that the private sector had approximately 15,500 hectares of wheat and delivered 85,000 hectares of wheat.
Okay.
Average yield of 5.48. Outside of that, the average yield was less than 3 tons a hectare.
Okay.
So in terms of bang for your buck, it's the private sector that are currently anchoring food security in the country.
Okay.
And our frustration, I'm going to jump ahead here and get in before you stop me.
It's okay.
Our frustration is that being that important, being that relevant, we don't feel that we're getting enough support from government or the commercial banks against what we're actually contributing.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Murdoch. I understand that you are playing a pivotal role when it comes to addressing issues in our economy, such as food security. And eventually, if you look at it, we are going to shift from food security into food luxury, which in turn will address issues such as import substitution, export growth in the near future. Now, as we round off in a snippet, Mr. Murdoch, I'm going to have to cut you short in about 30 seconds. Which areas as FCCA do you see yourself being involved in the coming years, like a look into the future, 5 years from now, in the long term?
The reality is that government have asked users of raw materials to be involved in financing up to 40% of their requirements.
Okay.
Now your big entities, your millers, your food processors, your oil expressors, growing of crops is not their business.
Okay.
Their business is processing those crops. And that's where private sector contractors have a major role to play.
Okay.
In that those entities are already contracting food crop contract members to essentially grow their crops for them to meet that 40% requirement from government.
Thank you so much, Mr. Marug. It was a pleasure having you with us. We're going to have you in the third and final segment. There you had it, viewers. We're going to go on a short commercial break. We'll be right back with this and more in the second segment. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. We are in the second segment of your program. You are watching Agriculture, New Directions, Agribusiness. Now, viewers, we encourage you to be a part of these conversations. Feel free to get in touch with me, the producer, Wadzanai Manyore, on 0772-807-506. Alternatively, you can like our Facebook page, Agribusiness with Wadzanai. We are also now available on Twitter, and our Twitter handle there is at Agribusiness110. Make sure to leave your comments and suggestions on our YouTube channel, Agribusiness with Wadzanai. Now, today we are going to be looking at contract farming, which has proven now and again to be the most sustainable method of financing agriculture. If you look at the value chain, it emanates from research, it goes on to production, processing, marketing, and consumption. Today we are going to be addressing issues surrounding production. You would find that production will often be limited in our country because of lack of proper financing and sustainable financing. At this point in time in this second segment, I am joined by Brendan Smythe. He is the director of Staywell. Brendan, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Wadzanai. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes. As we get into our discussion earlier on with Mr. Maddock, he was telling us of the, the nitty-gritties in the production spheres and how farmers are taking these kinds of initiatives. As a contractor, can you maybe take us through your operations? How many farmers have you maybe contracted or even assistance, and in which regions are you participating?
Absolutely, Wadzanai, thank you. So Staywell Trading is essentially the grain trading and contract farming arm of the Origin Corporation.
Okay.
The Origin Corporation is made up of about 4 or 5 agriculturally centered businesses. We currently are the largest silo owners in the country and operators of private grain storage.
Okay.
Affiliated to those structures, we have continuous flow grain dryers. Those are used to help our farmers rotate in between seasons, as you know,
Okay.
especially in a season like this where we might see some late plantings.
Yes.
We also in group have a fertilizer blending plant, one of the newest in the country, that's operated under the fertilizer brand Newfert.
Okay.
We have a collateral management business too, and as I've mentioned, Staywell takes care of the commodity trading and agri-financing.
Okay.
That's a function we've actually operated in the market since about 2004. But post-dollarization, obviously the environment enabled us to expand. So since 2010, we've really ramped our efforts up on the contract farming side to where today in the current summer season, we have about 11,500 hectares under maize and soybean, and that is with around about 62 predominantly large-scale irrigated farmers.
Okay.
We tend to hone in on irrigation purely because it's a big risk mitigator, being able to
Very
control irrigation on the crop.
Yes.
But in prior seasons where the insurance sector has been able to provide dry day cover, rain, drought insurance and those types of risk mitigators, we have expanded our net to take in dryland operations
Okay.
too. Yeah.
Yes. So no one is being left behind. Those farmers with irrigation equipment can get financing from you, and also our smallholder farmers might have limitations when it comes to having infrastructure to support irrigation. Moving right along, how has been the regulatory authority in this industry, which is Agricultural Marketing Authority, been of assistance to you or been of help to your operations and your organization?
Absolutely. So the AMA has provided a very important regulatory function, I think, to players in our sector. Obviously, they've also embarked currently on a farmer registration process, which has been a very good thing. I think in seasons to come, if we can see a credit database being built, that will be a great enabler towards other participants within the agri-financing sector coming on and having a pool of accredited farmers, for want of a better word, to be able to extend financing to. AMA has also provided a very valuable platform to us in terms of agri-value chain players to meet and deliberate over things like pricing policies, import policies, and that sort of thing. So as Graham alluded to in your earlier segment, Wadzanai, we really do welcome the interaction of our government with private sector at this stage. I think it's created a lot more clarity, and the policies that are in place are resulting in higher levels of domestic food production and import substitution, which is our ultimate goal as private sector contractors.
Yes, thank you so much, Brendan. You allude to the fact that the interaction of the government and the private sector is yielding positive results and is addressing issues in our economy such as food security, import substitution through the growth of crops like soya beans. We won't need to import anymore because we are now also growing it on our own. As we round off this segment, Brendan, what are some of the challenges that you are encountering in this industry as an agri-financer? I understand that when we talk of financing operations in agriculture, there are high risks involved. We might have periods of, like in this case, incessant rainfall. We might have periods of droughts. We might have, just sometimes unreliability from our farming community. There are risks that you encounter. Some of the challenges that you are encountering, and maybe for the sake of our audience at home, so that they can understand where you're coming from as a contractor.
Absolutely. So the actual contracting environment, I think, it needs to be naturally symbiotic. It has to be a win-win with our farmers. If it's not, if it's one-sided, I think that will honestly just result in the collapse either of the production or of the funding that goes into it. And as I alluded to earlier, this is something we've done for sort of the better part of 15 or 16 years successfully. So our model is tried and tested. I think sort of challenges we face right now that are impacting growth, scalability and production are things like access to capital, cost of capital, the current commercial banking environment that has issues with single client lending limits and those sorts of things. Because I mean, outside of our borders, you'll well know from your tobacco experience, fertilizer prices have gone up between 40 to 50%.
Yes.
As contractors, if we could get a greater proportion of our farmers' requirements through the RBZ auction system, I think the direct impact in terms of food price inflation on the ground would be felt immediately. We've seen it in the maize sector right now, where, as Graham alluded to, our farmers' output in maize tends to be sort of 8 to 9 tons a hectare, certainly on the irrigated crops as an average, if not more. That comes with a high level of fertilization. With fertilizer being priced as it is, break-even yields now are sort of 6.5 to 7 tons a hectare instead of 4.5, and that's really impacting our farmers' profitability. And that symbiosis I spoke to only works if both sides feel it's a win-win. So, things like access to auction monies and interbank rates are going to have a positive and scaling impact.
Thank you so much, Brendan. You are the fact of a symbiotic relationship between the private sector and also the involvement in the government, then our farming community. It has to be a win-win situation whereby the financier at the end of the day is also making profits out of it, and also the farmer is happy, and eventually our economy will grow. We'll address issues in our economy such as our budget deficit and even the growth of the GDP, the gross domestic product. Thank you so much, Brendan. In this segment, it was a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you, Wadzanan.
On that note, viewers, we're going to go on a short commercial break. We'll be right back with this and more in the third and final segment. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. You are watching Agricultural New Directions, and we are in the third and final segment. And today's episode was anchored on contract farming and agri-financing for our grains here in Zimbabwe. We are talking of maize, soya beans, and a bit of wheat. Now, as we round off our segment, I'm going to come to you, Graham, with this question. What was your reaction and your sentiments to the recent amendments of SI 140 of 2013?
Watson, I think the first point I'd like to stress is that for a change, we as the private sector actually had direct input into the drafting of the amendments to the new statutory instrument. As contractors, the statutory instrument is actually a critical piece of legislation to protect the investment that we have been making into agriculture. And therefore we fully support the SI. We believe that we are still working with government, particularly with the Agricultural Marketing Authority, in terms of refining how the SI is going to be implemented. and how it's going to be practically used at market time.
Okay, thank you so much. That was very precise and detailed. You alluded to the fact that you, for once, had a direct input as the contractors, as the private sector. You also had a say in the making of the statutory instrument. Coming to you, Brendan, with this one, how do you think the private sector's involvement, especially in agriculture, looking at funding and financing, how do you think it has helped improve agricultural production here in Zimbabwe?
I think it's done a huge amount, Wadzanai. If we look at both the tobacco sector in terms of the FDI it generates for our economy, as well as the food sector and the amount of money, as Graham and I have alluded to, that private contractors and industry have been committing towards the production of maize, soyas and wheat. And Graham and I have both looked at the statistics and can show within the models of our contracting that for every dollar we put into domestic production, we save our fiscus up to $3.
Yes.
In terms of input substitution. And with those types of returns, our economy really will start to show the benefits of how much money we've put towards agriculture.
Okay, coming to you, Graham, with the same question from your side. How do you think the private sector's involvement is going to enhance agricultural activities in Zimbabwe?
Wasn't I think the major benefit that we've brought to agriculture in the last 5 years has been a professional approach to how farmers are funded, how they're managed, how the crop is physically delivered. The default rate amongst private contractors is under 2%, whereas on other schemes that have maybe not had the experience that we've had, the default rate has been much higher. And in a way, our involvement and our interaction with other schemes, particularly government finance schemes, we've been able to pass on to them some of the lessons that we've learnt, and we are already seeing that benefiting those schemes in terms of an improved recovery of money that's been lent out, improved yields from the individual farmers, and an improved channel of product from farmer through sometimes the grain marketing board, sometimes others, directly to the end user, the processor.
Okay, thank you so much, Graham and Brendan. I cannot thank you enough for gracing our platform today with your presence. You were talking of issues surrounding important issues in our economy, where you were saying, in the words of Graham, that the default rate in the contract system is well below 2%, and you would find that it is much higher in other financing models. It was a pleasure having you with us today.
Thank you, Watson. I appreciate it.
Yes. On that note, viewers, we have come to the end of this week's edition. Be sure to join us again in the coming episodes, same place, same station. From me, Wadzanai Manyore. I'm also on Instagram, it's a W Manyore. And Mukoma Dani, Daniel Muranganwa. Have yourselves a fabulous evening. Thank you for watching.